If someone had told me a year ago that I'd find happiness in a dusty, half-empty apartment with a man who initially communicated only in grunts, I would have laughed. Or more accurately, I would have given a tight, polite smile, while my insides coiled into a knot of disbelief. My life, up until that point, had been a carefully curated collection of quiet routines and deliberate solitude. I was a fortress, and I had spent years reinforcing the walls. My new apartment was supposed to be the highest tower in that fortress. A top-floor unit overlooking a shared courtyard, it offered sunlight and a strategic distance from the world. I could watch the neighbors come and go, faceless shapes in the drama of daily life, without ever having to participate. It was perfect. A clean slate. A quiet place to lick wounds I refused to admit I had. I'd arranged my books by color before I even bought a proper mattress. I knew where my favorite mug would live and how the afternoon light would hit the worn armchair I'd hauled from my old place. These were the things that mattered. The small, controllable details that formed the architecture of my peace. People were not controllable. People were messy. I preferred the predictable company of paper and ink. Then there was him. Julian. I didn't know his name at first. He was just the neighbor's son, a descriptor that felt both dismissive and inadequate. He lived in the unit directly across the courtyard, with his mother, a kind woman with a garden full of aggressively cheerful marigolds. He was a physical presence, a disruption to the quiet landscape of my observations. He was tall, built with the kind of solid, practical strength that comes from working with your hands. He moved with an economy of motion that bordered on abrupt. He fixed his mother's fence, hauled bags of soil, changed a tire on her car, all with a focused intensity that left no room for pleasantries. From my window, he seemed like a force of nature, a storm cloud of competence and quiet frustration. He was everything I was not: grounded, physical, real. Our interactions were non-existent. A clipped nod if we happened to check our mail at the same time. The sharp, dismissive glance if he caught me watching from my window. I learned to look away quickly, a flush of heat creeping up my neck. He was a fixed point of antagonism in my new, quiet world, a boulder in the stream of my solitude. I resented his presence. I was fascinated by it. The barrier between us was clear. It was the 50 feet of manicured grass and his mother's marigolds. It was the glass of my window. It was the fact that he looked like he could break things, and I looked like I had spent my entire life trying not to get broken. We were two different species, occupying the same small habitat, by a cruel twist of fate. My moving day was the catalyst, the disruption I hadn't planned for. The universe, it seems, has a penchant for ironic cruelty. The moving company I'd hired on the cheap sent two sullen teenagers who smelled of stale smoke and complained about the stairs. They worked with the enthusiasm of condemned prisoners, dropping boxes marked fragile with theatrical thuds. They declared the job done at 4 o'clock, leaving my massive oak bookshelf, my grandfather's bookshelf, the heaviest and most sentimentally valuable thing I owned, wedged diagonally in the narrow hallway, just outside my apartment door. It was a monument to their incompetence, a wooden behemoth blocking my entrance. "It won't fit through the door frame," the taller one had mumbled, not meeting my eye. "Angle's wrong." They left me there, standing in a sea of cardboard, my one precious heirloom held hostage by geometry. I pushed, I pulled, I swore, my voice small and tight in the echoing hallway. The bookshelf didn't budge. It was a perfect, immovable symbol of my own inadequacy. I was trapped outside my own sanctuary by a piece of wood. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the base of my skull. My carefully constructed solitude was a joke. I couldn't even get my own furniture into my own home. My fortress had a fatal flaw. Me. That's when I heard a door open across the hall. Not Julian's. It was Mr. Henderson, an elderly man with a small, yapping dog. He peered out, his face a mask of mild curiosity. The dog yapped. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. And then, another door. The one directly across the courtyard. Julian's mother, Maria, stepped out onto her porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She saw my predicament instantly. Her eyes, warm and brown, took in the bookshelf, my flushed face, the general aura of despair radiating from my corner of the building. She didn't say anything to me. She just turned her head and called back into her apartment. "Julian, come help the new neighbor." My blood ran cold. Of all the people, anyone but him. I would rather have slept in the hallway. I would have rather sawed the bookshelf into pieces with my own teeth. He appeared in the doorway behind her, a silhouette against the warm light of their home. He looked annoyed. His brow was furrowed, his mouth set in a hard line. He wore a faded gray t-shirt that strained across his shoulders and jeans smudged with what looked like grease. He exchanged a few quiet words with his mother, then sighed, a sound of pure suffering that carried across the courtyard. He walked towards my building with that same deliberate, forceful stride. Each step felt like a drum beat, counting down to my own personal doom. He didn't look at me as he approached, his focus entirely on the monstrosity in the hall. He was here to solve a problem, and I was just a component of that problem. A clumsy, inconvenient variable. He stopped in front of the bookshelf, running a hand over the dark, polished wood. He didn't say hello. He just circled it, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He was assessing it, diagnosing it, the way a doctor might examine a wound. "Did they even try tilting it?" he asked. The sound of his voice, low and rough, startled me. It was the first time he'd ever spoken more than a single word in my direction. I don't know," I stammered, feeling my cheeks burn. "They just said it was stuck." He grunted. It was a sound of profound disdain, aimed at the movers, at the bookshelf, at the universe in general. He placed his hands on one end. "You take that side," he commanded, nodding his head towards the other end. "When I lift, you just guide it. Don't try to carry it. Just guide." I scrambled to obey, my hands fumbling against the cool wood. His proximity was overwhelming. I could smell the faint, clean scent of soap and something else, something metallic and warm, like engine oil. He was a wall of heat and solid presence in my cramped, chaotic hallway. "On 3, he said, his voice a low rumble. 1, 2, 3. He lifted. The bookshelf, which had felt like it was bolted to the floor, rose with a groan of protesting wood. It was an astonishing display of strength, done with such little apparent effort that it felt like a magic trick. My role was pathetic in comparison. I stumbled backwards, my hands merely brushing against the wood, guiding it as he pivoted the entire massive structure with the controlled power of a river current. He maneuvered it through the doorway with a final, careful twist. It was inside. Just like that. The impossible problem, solved in under 30 seconds. He lowered it gently to the floor in the living room, the wood settling with a soft sigh. The silence that followed was thick and awkward. He stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by my life in boxes, and he looked utterly out of place. A hawk, a canary cage. "Thank you," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. I really appreciate it. I don't know what I would have done." He just nodded, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the boxes, the unassembled furniture, the sheer volume of work that remained. His gaze lingered on the frame of my bed, leaning in two pieces against the far wall. "You got the bed frame together?" he asked, his tone flat, observational. "No, not yet. I was going to figure it out." The lie was flimsy and transparent. We both knew I would have probably ended up sleeping on the floor for a week, defeated by Allen keys and vague pictographic instructions. He let out another one of his long-suffering sighs. He walked over to the bed frame, picked up one of the heavy side rails, and examined it. It was in that moment, as I watched him, that I began to see him differently. Up close, he wasn't just an intimidating shape. The light from the hallway caught the faint silvery line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His hands, which I had only seen as large and capable, were covered in a lattice of faded cuts and calluses. These weren't the hands of an antagonist. They were the hands of someone who fixed things. He seemed tired. There were faint, bruised-looking shadows under his eyes that my window view had never revealed. The frustration I had always perceived as arrogance now looked more like weariness, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion. "Where are the screws?" he asked, not looking at me. I pointed to a small plastic bag on the floor. He crouched down, picking it up, and as he shifted his weight, his knee brushed against mine. It was nothing. A flicker of contact, fabric against fabric. But a jolt went through me, sharp and electric like a static shock on a cold day. My breath hitched in my throat. My entire nervous system lit up, focused on that one tiny point of contact. My heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to break free. "He's just helping you," I told myself. "This is nothing. You are a grown man. Get a grip." But my body wasn't listening. It was humming with a strange, unfamiliar energy. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He was already sorting the screws, his focus absolute. He found the instructions, gave them a cursory, dismissive glance, and then started assembling the frame. He worked with a quiet, methodical competence that was both mesmerizing and deeply intimidating. He knew how things fit together. I only knew how they fell apart. I felt useless, standing there, watching him build my bed. I should have been helping. I should have been offering him a drink. I should have been doing something other than cataloging the way the muscles in his back moved under his t-shirt. "Do you want a water?" I finally managed to ask. He grunted in what I took to be an affirmative, tightening a final bolt with a sharp twist of his wrist. I fled to the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled a bottle of water from a box. My kitchen was a disaster zone, but the sink worked. I rinsed a glass, my movements clumsy and loud. When I returned, he was wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thanks," he said, taking the glass. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it. Another jolt. This one's stronger. Warmer? It felt intentional, though I knew it couldn't have been. It was just an accident of proximity. But the feeling lingered, a phantom warmth on my skin. I snatched my hand back, as if I'd been burned. He drank the entire glass of water in one long pull, his throat working. He set the empty glass down on a stack of books. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time. His eyes were a dark, unreadable brown. "You write this stuff?" he asked, tilting his head towards the books. Yes, some of it. I'm a writer." The admission felt foolish, insubstantial, compared to his tangible competence. He built things. I arranged words. He nodded slowly. "Huh." It wasn't a judgment. It was just a sound, an acknowledgement of a foreign concept. He turned back to his work. He moved the mattress onto the newly assembled frame. heaving it into place with a single grunt of effort. My apartment was slowly transforming from a chaotic warehouse into a home, and he was the one doing it. I was just a spectator in my own life. Then he swore, a sharp, sudden curse. He pulled his hand back from the wooden headboard. A dark line of red welled up on the side of his palm. A splinter. A big one. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing forward. "It's fine," he said, his voice tight with irritation. He tried to pull it out with his fingernails, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Don't," I said, my own voice surprising me with its firmness. "You'll make it worse. I have a first aid kit. And tweezers. Sit down." The power dynamic shifted in an instant. He was injured. I had the solution. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes, and then to my astonishment he sat on the edge of the newly built bed. He held out his hand, palm up. An offering. A concession. I found the kit, my heart hammering. My hands were steady as I opened it, pulling out an antiseptic wipe and the tweezers. I knelt in front of him. The intimacy of the position was not lost on me. I was at his feet, about to perform a delicate, careful task. "This might sting," I said quietly, dabbing the wipe around the wound. He didn't flinch. He just watched me, his gaze intense. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the tiny dark hairs on his arms. I focused on his hand. It was large, the skin rough and calloused, but his fingers were long and surprisingly elegant. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his pulse beneath my thumb as I held his wrist. I took a breath and carefully, gently, worked the tip of the tweezers around the splinter. He was so still. I could feel his eyes on my face, on my hands. The silence in the room was a physical weight, pressing in on us. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. The splinter came out, clean and whole. I dropped it onto a tissue. I put a small bandage over the cut. My fingers lingered for a fraction of a second too long on his skin. "There," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I looked up at him. His expression was one I couldn't read. It was soft, questioning. The hard lines of his face had eased. He didn't pull his hand away. He just kept looking at me, and the space between us felt charged, full of unspoken things. The sun had begun to set, casting long golden shadows across the floor. The room was warm and dusty. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of traffic, the distant bark of a dog. But inside my apartment, the world had shrunk to the few inches of air between my face and his. "You're good at that," he said, his voice low. "My mother was a nurse," I replied, the words feeling inadequate. He finally drew his hand back, flexing his fingers. He stood up. The spell was broken. I felt a pang of loss, sharp and immediate. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. He just stood there, looking around the room. It was nearly livable now. The bookshelf stood proudly against one wall. The bed was assembled. The path from the door to the kitchen was clear. Let me pay you," I said, fumbling for my wallet. "Or buy you dinner. Something." He shook his head. "Don't worry about it." Just then, a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The sky outside the window had turned a bruised, purple gray. The first fat drops of rain splattered against the glass. "Looks like a storm's rolling in," he said, his voice neutral. The rain came faster, a sudden downpour that hammered against the roof and windows. It was a torrential midsummer storm, the kind that appears out of nowhere and floods the streets in minutes. "You should wait it out," I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to think about them. It's really coming down." He looked out the window, then back at me. He hesitated for a long moment. I held my breath. I wanted him to stay, The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. The idea of being alone in my quiet, orderly apartment suddenly felt like a punishment. "Okay," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Yeah, okay." I had no furniture except the armchair and the bed. I had no food except a sad-looking apple and a box of cereal. "I could order a pizza," I offered, the suggestion feeling absurdly domestic. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, lighting something warm in his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "pizza sounds good." We ate sitting on the floor, using a flattened cardboard box as a table. The only light came from a single lamp I'd plugged in, casting a warm, intimate glow on our small circle. The storm raged outside, a constant soothing roar of wind and rain that sealed us off from the rest of the world. We were in a bubble, a temporary fragile pocket of existence. He talked. He actually talked. He told me he worked construction and framing houses. He told me he was saving up to move out of his mom's place, but it was slow going. He spoke about his father, who had passed away a few years ago, and how he felt a responsibility to stick around for his mom. He wasn't the arrogant, surly brute I had imagined. He was just a man, carrying burdens I couldn't see. He had a quiet, self-deprecating sense of humor. He listened, really listened, when I told him about my writing, asking questions that were surprisingly insightful. "It must be quiet," he said, gesturing around the apartment. "In your head, I mean, to write." "It's the opposite," I confessed, surprised by my own honesty. "It's loud. That's why I need the room to be quiet, to hear my own thoughts over the noise." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "My job is loud. The saws, the nail guns, the other guys yelling. Sometimes I just want to sit in a quiet room for an hour." He looked at me. "Like this." My stomach filled with a swarm of bees, a nervous, fluttering energy that was pure terror and pure hope. The air was thick with things we weren't saying. With the pizza gone and the storm showing no signs of letting up, a new kind of silence fell between us. Not awkward this time. It was a heavy silence, full of potential. He leaned back against the wall, stretching his long legs out in front of him. His knee was only an inch from mine. I was acutely aware of every breath he took, of the way the lamplight carved shadows onto his face. "Why'd you move here?" he asked, his voice soft, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "A fresh start," I said, the answer both true and a lie. "My last place had too many memories." I didn't elaborate. I didn't have to. He seemed to understand. "Sometimes I think about that," he said, his gaze distant. "Just packing a bag and going somewhere no one knows me. Starting over." He turned his head to look at me. "But I don't think I'd be brave enough to actually do it." "It's not brave," I said, my voice tight. "It's cowardly. It's running away." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just surviving." The way he said it, the quiet empathy in his voice, undid me. Some wall inside me, a wall I had spent years building, crumbled into dust. I felt seen. Understood. In a way I hadn't been in a very long time. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him leaning in. Maybe it was me closing the distance. It didn't matter. All I knew was that one moment we were talking, and the next, his face was inches from mine. His eyes searched my face, asking a question I was too terrified to answer with words. So I answered it. I leaned forward that last, final inch. His lips were soft, softer than I could have imagined. The kiss wasn't passionate or demanding. It was hesitant, questioning. It was a discovery. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The calloused roughness of his skin was a startling, wonderful contrast to the gentleness of his mouth. It was a slow, quiet exploration, a conversation without words. It tasted of pizza and rain and something that was just him. I put my hand on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was beating just as fast as mine. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were closed. His breathing was unsteady. "Leo," he whispered. It was the first time he had used my name. Hearing it from his lips felt like a revelation. I couldn't speak. I just tangled my fingers in the front of his t-shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. He kissed me again, deeper this time. All the hesitation was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate need that I felt echoed in my own bones. This was the confession. This was the answer to a question I hadn't even known I was asking. The fortress I had built for myself was gone. He hadn't broken down the walls. He had just walked through the door I hadn't realized I'd left open for him. The storm outside finally began to subside, the roar of the rain softening to a gentle patter. But inside my apartment, a different kind of storm had just begun. We ended up on the bed he had built. Clothes were shed with a clumsy, fumbling urgency. In the dim lamplight, his body was a landscape of muscle and shadow and pale scars. My own body felt alien and new under his hands, under his gaze. He touched me with a reverence that made me want to cry. He explored my skin as if he were memorizing a map, his calloused fingers tracing lines of fire wherever they went. There was an honesty in our movements, a vulnerability that transcended the physical. It wasn't about lust, not really. It was about connection. It was about the profound, aching relief of not being alone, of being seen and touched and wanted, not in spite of my quiet, broken pieces, but because of them. Later, we lay tangled together under a single thin sheet, the cool night air drifting in through the open window. The rain had stopped. The world was washed clean and quiet. His arm was a heavy, comforting weight across my chest, his head resting on my shoulder. I could feel the soft puff of his breath against my neck. I stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling of my new bedroom, my heart a slow, steady drum. I had never felt so terrified in my entire life, or so profoundly, breathtakingly happy. I was adrift on a strange and wonderful new ocean, and I had no idea how to swim. I didn't care. I just listened to the sound of his breathing and prayed the sun would never rise. But the sun did rise. It always does. It came in pale gray shafts of light through the window, painting the bare walls with the promise of a new day. I woke slowly. A sense of deep contentment settled in my bones. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I felt the warmth of the body next to me, the weight of his arm, and it all came rushing back, Julian. I turned my head carefully, not wanting to wake him. He was still asleep, his face relaxed and younger in the morning light. The scar over his eyebrow was a faint pale line. His dark hair was a mess. A small smile played on my lips. I could get used to this. The thought was a dangerous, hopeful thing. I lay there for a long time, just watching him breathe. The quiet intimacy of it felt more profound than anything that had happened the night before. This was the real thing. The morning after. The space where fantasy gives way to reality. Then his eyes fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented for a second. His gaze found mine. For a heartbeat, there was a flash of warmth, a sleepy smile, and then it was gone, replaced by something else, a shuddered look, panic. He sat up abruptly, pulling the sheet with him. He ran a hand through his hair, not looking at me. The comfortable shared space between us suddenly felt 100 miles wide. "I have to go," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "My mom, she'll be up soon." The excuse was so flimsy, it was almost insulting. The air in the room grew cold. My own panic began to rise, a sick, icy feeling in my stomach. "Julian," I started, but I didn't know what to say. What was there to say? He was already out of bed, pulling on his jeans from the night before. His movements were jerky, hurried. He wouldn't look at me. He was a stranger again. The competent, efficient man who fixed things and then left. Last night, he had fixed me. Now he was leaving. He found his shirt, pulled it on. He walked to the door of the bedroom, then paused, his back to me. "Last night was—" He trailed off. He shook his head. "I gotta go." And then he was gone. I heard the front door of the apartment open and click shut. And then silence. A profound, crushing silence that was so much heavier than any solitude I had ever known before. I lay there, staring at the ceiling as the morning light grew brighter. The warmth where he had been lying next to me faded until the sheet was just cold cotton. The apartment, which had felt like a sanctuary the night before, now felt like a tomb. It was full of his ghost, the indentation of his head on the pillow, the empty water glass on the stack of books, the bandage I had put on his hand, which must have come off in the night. My mind began to race, a vicious spiral of self-recrimination. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by a storm and proximity. He regretted it. He was disgusted with me, with himself. I had misread everything. I had taken a simple act of kindness, him helping me move my furniture, and I had twisted it into something else, something I wanted it to be. I was a fool. The anxiety was a physical thing, a knot of razors in my chest. I got up, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked through the apartment. The bookshelf stood against the wall, a silent monument to my humiliation. The bed was made, a testament to his strength and my weakness. Everything he had touched felt tainted. I spent the day in a fog of misery. I tried to unpack, but my hands felt clumsy and useless. I would pick something up, stare at it blankly, and then put it back down. Every sound from the hallway made me jump. Every time I glanced out the window, I expected to see him. I hoped I would see him. I dreaded it. His car was still parked in its usual spot. He was there, just across the courtyard, 50 feet away, an impassable chasm. The silence stretched, an hour, a whole afternoon. The sun set, and my apartment was plunged into darkness. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the armchair, staring at the wall. The quiet I had craved when I moved here was now my tormentor. It was an active, malevolent thing, filled with the echo of his voice, the memory of his touch. My old solitude had been a comfortable blanket. This new solitude was a cage. It was defined not by my own presence, but by his absence. Another day passed in the same gray haze. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I replayed every moment of our night together, searching for the clue I had missed, the sign that this was all a terrible mistake. I found it everywhere, in his hesitation, in my own foolish, hopeful desperation. I was an idiot. I built walls to protect myself, and the one time I let someone in, they looted the place and left the door swinging open in the wind. I deserved this. This is what happened when you let people in. This is why routines and solitude were safer. They never woke up in the morning and looked at you with panic in their eyes. On the evening of the second day, I was sitting on the floor, trying to force myself to eat a bowl of cereal when I heard it. A knock on the door. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was probably Mr. Henderson, complaining about some noise I hadn't made. It was a delivery. It was anyone but him. The knock came again, louder this time, firm, insistent. My body moved before my brain could object. I was on my feet, walking to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, braced myself for disappointment, and opened it. It was him. He looked terrible. Worse than me. The shadows under his eyes were darker. He hadn't shaved. He was wearing a clean t-shirt and jeans, but he looked rumpled, as if he'd been twisting the fabric in his hands for hours. He was holding a single, sad-looking paper bag. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me. His face was a mess of emotions I couldn't decipher. Regret, fear, and something else. Something that looked a lot like the hope that was dying in my own chest. "Hi," he said, his voice raspy. "Hi," I whispered back. Can I come in?" I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked inside, and the apartment, which had felt so large and empty, suddenly felt small again. Full. He was a center of gravity, pulling all the air in the room towards him. He stopped in the middle of the living room, in the exact spot where he had first stood 2 days ago. He looked around, at the few boxes I had managed to unpack, at the general state of bleakness. He held out the paper bag. "I brought you a sandwich," he said. "From that deli down the street. I figured you probably hadn't eaten." The gesture was so simple, so mundane, that it almost broke me. It was an act of caring, a quiet apology. I took the bag. Our fingers brushed. This time, I didn't pull away. The jolt was still there, but it wasn't frightening anymore. It felt like coming home. "Thank you," I said. We stood in silence for another long, heavy moment. The questions I wanted to ask were a screaming chorus in my head. Why did you leave? What happened? Was it a mistake? But I couldn't force them out. He spoke first, his voice low and strained. "Leo, I'm sorry." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a raw, painful vulnerability. "I'm so sorry. The way I left, that was not okay." "I thought you regretted it," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I thought it was a mistake." "No," he said, shaking his head fiercely. "No, it wasn't a mistake. It was the only thing that's felt real in I don't know how long." He took a step closer. "I panicked. That's all. I woke up and you were there, and it was perfect. And it scared the hell out of me." I just stared at him, trying to process his words. He was scared. The strong, silent man who could lift a bookshelf with his bare hands was scared. "I don't do this," he continued, gesturing vaguely between us. "I don't feel this for anyone. I build things, I fix things, I go to work. That's my life. It's simple. And then you're not simple. At all." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "I walked out of here, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And for 2 days, I've been a wreck. My mom thinks I have the flu. All I could think about was you, here, thinking I was some asshole who just used you." The pain in his voice was genuine. It was a mirror of my own. "I was scared too," I admitted, my voice quiet. "When you left, I thought my life was over, which is ridiculous. I've only known you for a few days." "It doesn't feel like a few days," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." He closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't touch me yet. He just stood in front of me, his presence a warm, solid thing. "I don't know what this is, Leo, and I don't know how to do it. I'm probably going to be terrible at it. I'm going to get scared again. But I want to try. If you do." Hope, bright and fierce, bloomed in my chest, chasing out the last of the cold shadows. This was it. The clarifying conversation. The moment where we chose to step into the terrifying new territory together. "I want to try," I said, and my voice was steady. A slow smile spread across his face. The same smile that had transformed him before. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, shiny key on a plain silver ring. He held it out to me, placing it in my open palm. It was cool and solid against my skin. "It's the key to my place," he said, "in case, you know, in case you need me, or if you just want to come over. Whenever." It was more than a key. It was a promise, an anchor, a tangible symbol of commitment that spoke louder than any words could. It was an offering of trust. He was letting me into his fortress. I closed my hand around the key, the metal warming to my touch. I looked from the key to his face, and I leaned in and kissed him. There was no hesitation this time, no fear, just a deep, profound sense of relief, of rightness. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me tight against him, and for the first time in my new apartment, I felt like I was finally, truly home. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. The new beginning wasn't a grand cinematic explosion. It was a series of small, gentle moments that slowly, carefully, wove our lives together. It was waking up in the morning and finding him still there, his arm thrown over my waist, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm in the quiet of the room. The morning after anxiety was gone, replaced by a sense of peace so deep it felt like it had settled into my very bones. It was making coffee in my still chaotic kitchen, bumping into each other in the small space, his hands finding my hips to steady me. He made terrible coffee, strong and bitter, but I drank it every morning because he had made it for me. It was the comfortable silence of sharing a space. Him, sitting on the floor, patiently assembling a flat-pack coffee table while I sat in my armchair, writing. The sound of his screwdriver was a counterpoint to the tapping of my keyboard. We were two solitary creatures learning to be alone together. He started leaving things at my apartment. A toothbrush in the holder next to mine. A worn, comfortable sweatshirt draped over the back of the armchair. A half-finished book on the bedside table. Each item was a small claim, a quiet declaration. This is my space now, too. And I loved it. My fortress was no longer a place of solitude. It was our shared territory. One Saturday, he helped me finally unpack the last of my books. We filled the oak bookshelf he had carried into my life. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he handled the old, fragile paperbacks. He'd pull one out, read the back cover, and ask me about it. He listened, really listened, to my rambling explanations of why a certain author or a particular story mattered so much to me. He didn't understand my world of words and metaphors, not completely, and I didn't understand his world of angles and load-bearing walls. But we were learning. We were translating for each other. He taught me how to properly hang a picture frame so it was perfectly level. I read him a chapter of the novel I was working on, my voice shaking at first, then growing steady as I saw the rapt attention on his face. Our lives, which had seemed so irreconcilably different, began to find a shared rhythm. We ate dinner on the floor until the coffee table was built. We took walks in the evening. We met his mother properly, and her warm smile told me she had known about us long before we'd said a word. I look back on the man I was when I first signed the lease for this apartment, a man so determined to be an island, so terrified of the messiness of human connection. I had designed a life of careful, quiet control because I thought it would keep me safe. I believed that solitude was the price of peace. Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He wasn't just a disruption to my routine. He was a demolition. He walked into my life with his quiet competence and his hidden vulnerabilities, and he took a sledgehammer to the walls I had so carefully constructed. And in the rubble, we built something new, something better, something shared. This life, this shared messy life, is so much more peaceful than the sterile quiet I had before. It's a life where my heart is no longer a frantic trapped bird, but a steady beating drum. It's a life where the silence is not an absence, but a comfortable, shared breath. I came to this apartment looking for a place to hide, and instead, Julian showed me a place where I could finally be found.